In 1989, Magnum XL 200 became the first coaster to break the 200-foot barrier. Sorry, Moonsault Scramble fans, your coaster may be over 200 feet, but since it's a shuttle coaster that has inversions and wasn't built in the United States, we'll just pretend it's not the first. But anyways, the term hypercoaster was born. Originally coined by aerodynamics, the term hypercoaster means any roller coaster that stands 200 feet or taller. It was created mostly as an advertising gimmick, something to entice the crowd. Never did we know that almost 30 years later, this term would be twisted and abused into something that coaster nerds can argue about for all eternity. Okay, so you might be wondering, where does the controversy come into play? Let me run down a few coasters and see if you can figure out what I mean. Starting off with our first, Magnum, which stands 200 feet tall, is considered a hypercoaster. Moonsault Scramble is not, though it's over 200 feet tall. Superman Ride of Steel, or Superman the Ride, is a hypercoaster, and that's over 200 feet. SheiKra or Griffin, both over 200 feet, are not considered hypercoasters. Phantom's Revenge, not quite 200 feet, but it has a drop over 200 feet because it dives down the mountainside. This is a hypercoaster. Wicked Twister, a shuttle coaster that's over 200 feet, not a hypercoaster. Apollo's Chariot, only 170 feet but with a drop over 200 feet, is a hypercoaster. But Valravn, which is taller than Apollo's Chariot, not a hyper. Okay, so are you starting to see the confusing trend here? The original definition that I provided says a hypercoaster is any roller coaster over 200 feet. So why aren't these other coasters not given the same title? Well, some decided that a title of a hyper can't just be any old roller coaster over 200 feet. Nope, it's got to meet some new requirements. Now, the ride has to be 200 feet, but the layout needs to focus on speed and airtime. Oh, and it can't have any inversions to be considered a hyper coaster. Certain manufacturers like B&M or Intamin started naming their roller coaster designs as either a hyper coaster. Intamin uses the term mega coaster, or obviously you've seen Giga with Giga, but obviously that's a completely different topic. But anyways, they're the ones who came up with the new term and definition for hyper coasters. So even with these new definitions, there still seems to be some outliners here. So let me explain. Steel Eel, which isn't 200 feet, it stands around 150 feet. It's not considered a hypercoaster, though it acts and looks just like any other hypercoaster. But in fact, it isn't one. Steel Vengeance, which opened up this year, stands 205 feet and is coined the first ever hyper hybrid. But yet it includes 4 inversions. Don't even get me started calling Steel Vengeance a hybrid coaster, because in the same park, there are 2 other coasters with steel tracks and wooden supports, and they aren't called hybrids. No, those are steel coasters. So in conclusion, where am I going with this? What do I think makes a coaster qualify as a hyper coaster? Honestly, I just don't care. I'll say this, if you think it's a hyper coaster, go ahead and call it a hyper coaster. I mean, the parks are making up their own qualifications, so why not make your own? Alright, well that's it for today's video. What do you think makes a hyper coaster? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you did like today's video, let me know by liking this and leave some comments. Maybe I'll make some more Coaster Rant videos. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Check out more of my other content and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.